My name is Karen Ellery Jones. On behalf of the Sandwich Public Library, we're welcoming Peter Manso, who is a two-time Pulitzer Prize nominee author. He's from Truro, and he's written a wonderful book, Reasonable Doubt, The Fashion Writer, Cape Cod, and the Trial of Chris McGowan. Now, you may recall in January of 2002, Krista Worthington was murdered in Truro in her cottage, and this book covers the murder, the trial, the investigation, and it's an explosive tell-all book behind the scenes. And I have to admit that I was here on the Cape during the trial, but I had no idea what went on behind those closed doors of the courtroom. So I want to welcome you to Sandwich. I'm glad that you found time in your schedule to come and visit us. And let's talk about the book. We have so much to talk about. We don't have too much time, so we have to get right to it. Roll it. So why did you write the book?
Well, it started out as a year-and-a-half project. I think most nonfiction writers want to do a trial book. You know, visions of in cold blood,
right.
Capote dancing in their head. This turned out to be a 6-year book, because what happened is once I got involved, it mushroomed, it got bigger and bigger, and while the focus remained the trial, there was one back drama after another that presented itself. Police misconduct, abiding racism in that jury room, which I believe influenced the verdict greatly. And then all the little stories interwoven with the trial chapter, which is half of the book. We have Krista Worthington, a portrait of Worthington, the victim, largely based, I should add, on her diaries, because I got access to this stuff. Portraits, biographical portraits of the prosecutor, Rob Welsh, the fourth Cape Cod, now Judge Welsh, going all the way back to the 19th century. So it became a history of Cape Cod as well. And then when I got into the crime and I started doing my poking around, which I'm sort of known for doing, I found myself getting sucked deeper and deeper into this hall of mirrors. The Cape has an enormous dope problem. The Cape, over the past 20, 25 years, as everyone knows, has changed majorly. And what you have now is a very odd and difficult situation. It's become a two-class economy, basically. Middle class is rapidly disappearing on the Cape. Sons of second and third generation families can no longer look forward to moving into the family home and living their lives on the Cape. Correspondingly, we have a two-season economy here in the main. And then you have this desperate, awful world in the wintertime where many of the washer shores, if you will, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s too, pass the winter months drinking themselves silly, taking dough, and waiting for the restaurants and for the construction business and so forth to resume in the spring. Many of them are living on unemployment, food stamps, and the like. The Cape, let me begin with, Massachusetts is the fourth most dope-consuming state in America, according to the U.S. Department of Health. Cape Cod is heads and tails above any other county in the Commonwealth for drug offenses, drug arrests, drug usage, all kinds of drugs, from OxyContin to heroin. Any high school parent knows the problems, or has heard of these problems. This it just presented itself as the subtext to this murder. So there was no ignoring it. And thus the book has sort of presented itself, I mean, in its final iteration. Went through 26 drafts, I should tell you. 26 drafts. But in its final form, it's as much about the Cape Cod justice system as it is about Krista, as it is about Chris McGowan, as it is about the principles in the trial itself. So in a sense, it's a page-turner, which is almost anthropological in its thrust. And I think, you know, this is certainly of interest to people. By the way, the book was just dubbed Summer's Best Read by the LA Times, which I found very reassuring because it tells me it's not just a Cape Cod book,
right,
that it works as a book. But for the life of me, I've had the book's been out, what, a week and a half, 2 weeks? People are coming up to me and saying, your book is scaring the hell out of me. Because of this look into everything that is behind this trial.
Right. So look, people are scared because of the ever-present drug problem on Cape Cod, failure of the justice system.
The incestuousness of, I mean, this is a justice system, and there are good apples, there are bad apples, like anywhere. But this is a very, very strange kind of place. This is a community, a legal community, in which judges take their Florida winter vacations with prosecutors and with local defense attorneys. I've heard stories that they're driving down 95 to Florida, 2-3 cars, talking to each other on CB radios. It's not supposed to be that way. This is a world in which, within a week or two after the verdict, the Worthington family, that is the family of the victim, held a party, which was at a restaurant, not far from here, as a matter of fact, which was attended by the prosecutor, who's now a judge, who's now a district judge. You don't do this. I mean, I can go on and on with what I regard as the lapses in judgment, the withholding of exculpatory evidence, the instances of overt racism that run through this trial. And I'm a very naive boy. I mean, I've been around the block, I've written a number of books, I've traveled the world, I've been correspondent for major magazines. My time on Cape Cod, which goes all the way back to my youth, is on the outer Cape. It's P-Town and Truro.
Right.
Well, boy, when I got into this, I realized P-Town and Truro, not the same Cape Cod as down here, or in Dennis, or in Falmouth. So the book, in that sense, was It was a journey of discovery for me, and a particularly difficult kind of discovery, because I found myself forced to discover things that I thought I was on very intimate terms with.
Right.
Fool me.
All right,
To you.
Let's talk about the trial. You sat there the entire time taking copious notes.
How do you know they were copious notes?
Because someone told me.
Did they? People were making fun of my little orange French notebooks. I love them.
Right. Let's talk about the jury. I know that there were 3 members of the jury who claimed that other members of the jury had some racial bias, and they felt that the racial bias was percolating throughout the entire jury deliberations.
But before they went into deliberations,
right.
Before the jury was charged, as they were listening to the case, they would go out and have lunch together in the luncheonette across the street from the courthouse.
Right, yeah.
And I wound up speaking with 5 or maybe 6 of the jurors. And I was getting this from, several points of view, not just, the holdouts, the 3 holdouts who subsequently filed affidavits within days of the verdict, claiming that, some pretty awful stuff was going on inside that jury room. What was that awful stuff? Well, broadly speaking, it's reminiscent of many scenes, and I just saw the film, resaw the film recently, 12 Angry Men,
Right.
where people were playing out their private agendas in that jury room. And you're not supposed to do that. Judges instruct jurors to look at the facts that have come up in the course of the trial, both sides, and look at them carefully, and not let their private opinions and so forth seep in. Now, that's difficult, of course. But these jurors made very little attempt to do that. For example, there were 2 easels. The jurors sat at a long table, conference table. And at the head of the table, there were 2 easels set up. One easel had on it, this is day after day, we had 6 days of deliberations. One easel had a pad in which they listed the pros, conviction, non-conviction, point by point, bullets. The other easel contained, supported and demonstrated and presented crime scene photographs.
Right, I remember reading that.
And
Is
there was-
is that something that is done during trials?
Who knows? Of course it is. But what is not done in trials, and case law is very specific on this, this is immediate grounds for a retrial. That second easel, most of the time, presented one crime scene photo, and I've seen all these photos, just as I've seen all the police reports. I had access to all of this stuff, of Krista Worthington lying on her back, her head lolled slightly to the right, mouth puckered like a fish dying, gasping for air. She was stabbed once, not in the heart, but actually nicked the intercostal, the sac between the lung and whatever. She aspirated blood. It may have taken her quite some time to die. We don't know. And she is naked, save for her flannel fleece top, which had been pulled up, exposing her
from the
breast.
waist down, right?
No, she was naked from the breast down.
Down, okay.
Her sweatpants or whatever she'd been wearing had been pulled off or taken off, and the top had been pushed up, exposing her breasts. DNA belonging to the defendant in this case was found in her vagina as well as on her left breast. Saliva-borne DNA on her breast. Let me just insert here that another thing I got into, another thing that took time and added months to this book, is that I got into, as I had, because it became an issue in the trial, not that anyone really probed it. It was the gynecology of rape. I not only hired a Boston area emergency room physician to review the autopsy report with me, and we spent an afternoon drawing diagrams on the floor, lying down. We came up with the argument that the killer, this never came up in trial, was left-handed.
Right, I read that. That was very interesting.
And it was never exercised. The other thing is that the gynecology of rape, the autopsy report, you fill in, it's a form type document, and gynecological, no abnormalities on the autopsy report. This is state, autopsy. State medical examiner performs this autopsy, this exam.
So there were no abrasions?
No abrasions, no bleeding, no tearing. Now, it turns out that in the latest literature in this field, posits the figure 86 with some percentage, some decimal numbers after the decimal point, in roughly 86% of instances where women are violently raped. Now, all rape is violent, but by violent rape, they are referring to women who are beaten, not simply violated, but beaten, as was Krista. But in 86% of the time, there is demonstrable, visible, measurable vaginal damage. There was none here. This was never introduced to trial. But again, you ask, what took time? Following up. I mean, this may sound arrogant, but I probably know more about this case than the DA, the state police investigators, the prosecutor, or the defense lawyer.
So let's just get back to the left-handed, when the wound suggests that it was the person who stabbed Krista was left-handed.
And Chris McCowan is not left-handed.
Right. What about Frazier?
I don't know. I try to find out. How do you find out? The police have been protecting him. Can't get near him. Anyone who doubts that I attempted to speak with Frazier is welcome to come and see copies of the letters that I sent him. Likewise, anyone who doubts that I attempted to see the district attorney, the investigators on this case. Likewise, you can come along and look at copies of my emails and letters that were mailed. So you were asking about the wound. Right.
I mean, to me, it would seem as though the defense attorney should have.
This was an omission, possibly.
That was right.
Hey, look, Bob George, in his favor, I must say that he was vastly outgunned.
Right.
He had one part-time investigator, and as it turned out, he had me. I mean, me in the sense that I was doing a great deal of the research, which I was turning over to him, just as I was also turning it over to the court and to the DA's office. You know, that was mandatory. I had to handle it that way. Otherwise, I was letting myself in for craziness.
Right, so claims of you just working for the
It's
defense are groundless.
preposterous, just preposterous. And in fact, they're libelous. You know, if I had nothing better to do with myself, I'd file a lawsuit. You know, I mean, the simple and demonstrable and observable truth, anyone can go and look at the tapes from Court TV, which covered the trial from beginning to end, is that every morning, a dozen or more of staffers from the DA's office marched into that courtroom. The prosecutor, Rob Welch, would come in, you know, with his little trolley of notes and records and so forth and exhibits, and he would be followed by two secretaries. Not, what is it, I'm guessing now, 100 yards from the courtroom in the DA's office proper. He has an infinite number of secretaries, researchers, other assistant district attorneys. He has the state crime lab. He has a vast resource of the state police at his disposal. On the other hand, or on the other side of the aisle, we have, what, a 35-year-old, 76 IQ, slow, shall we say, Afro-American garbage collector represented by a passionate, skilled, but nonetheless court-appointed lawyer whose resources were highly limited. So there was a kind of David and Goliath aspect to this thing.
Right. Let's just talk about the DNA sweep, because
the churro
DNA
operation,
sweep.
yeah.
So it was voluntary, but
Well, it wasn't voluntary.
that's what they like to say, but they were put on a list if
Exactly. The case had to be solved. It had gone 3.5 years without any break.
Right. So they were feeling a lot of pressure, a lot of heat to get this solved.
Huge pressure. Not only from the press,
But from the Worthington
every
family.
anniversary, someone can go back to the library and check the Cape Cod Times, Boston Globe. Every anniversary of the killing for 3 years, there was a piece, the obligatory, what's happening? Why don't we have the killing? But there was also pressure from the Worthington family, which at one point tried to get O'Keefe pulled off the case after he referred to the victim as basically a slut who would sleep with anyone.
Right.
And also after he greeted a shall we say, overeager female reporter at his home, stepped out of the shower,
towel,
only
right,
in the famous towel. I mean, highly dignified head lawman of Barnstable County, who, well, whatever, we can get to that later. The DNA sweep commenced in January, exactly 3 years after the killing. And it was preposterous. It was so ill-conceived. I mean, why in the world would the killer, if he was still on Cape Cod, why would he volunteer his DNA? And moreover, why would this killer have remained for 3 years on Cape Cod? I mean, it just makes no sense whatsoever. But let's face it, this was a public relations gimmick. And I was not on Cape Cod at that point. I was in Berkeley, and I was called by one of the papers to comment. And I said, had I been here, I would have refused to surrender my DNA, not for the ACLU reasons that a number of Truro men used as the basis for refusing, but rather because to agree to be swabbed was in some sense to justify this ridiculous exercise in public relations where the DA seemed to be doing his job. He was not doing his job. Moreover, there was a very real Fourth Amendment issue here because, as you say, we had two cops or two detectives at the post office, which is the social nexus.
Right.
And we had another two at Dutra's Market, which is the only place you could buy a loaf of bread off-season in Truro, windswept Truro. And these guys were approaching all men between the ages of 15 and 50, roughly, with a photograph. They would thrust in your face a photograph of Krista, and they would say, do it for the child.
Okay, so they were under pressure.
Well, they would do this in public, and then when you say, I don't feel comfortable doing it, they would inform you, well, if you don't do it, your name and license plates are going on a special list.
Now, once they swabbed for DNA, didn't the samples, they didn't get straight to the crime
You
lab.
are reading closely. Good for you.
That must be the lawyer in me, right?
Well, yeah. No. I mean, these details add up, and hence my title, Reasonable
Right.
Doubt. I mean, what is reasonable doubt? Reasonable doubt means you still, as a balanced, semi-sane individual, have questions about this man's or the defendant's guilt which you cannot answer in the affirmative. Therefore, you have doubt. And that's the way the legal system works, and it's supposed to work. It didn't work here. Yes, maybe 150 or so men provided their DNA. The majority of those samples, including the Cowans, which we can talk about in a moment, sat on a shelf in the DA's office for up to a year before they were even submitted. In fact, at the time they made the arrest in April 2005, the arrest of McCowan, there was close to 90, I believe, samples that had not yet been submitted to the state crime lab. And then, of course, there's a corollary issue. Their phony line, we're going to give you back if we don't find a match, the DNA is going to be destroyed. There was the ACLU subsequently filed a class action suit against the DA's office because they hadn't destroyed it.
Right, but didn't they say they did?
Well, first they lied about it.
Right, they lied about it.
Yes, they lied about it. Well, you know, Mike O'Keefe has lied in the past. He's been caught. I mean, for example, 2 years ago, a Brazilian house painter from the Brazilian community in Hyannis was shot 3 times by a police officer for speeding. He ran away from the cop, I think it was in Harwich, because he'd overstayed his green card, was afraid of being deported. He had a girlfriend and 2 kids. So he accelerated, then he came to his senses and he stopped in someone's driveway. Story is the cop came up to him and shot him 3 times right through the windshield, killed him.
I remember
Mike
that.
O'Keefe's first response was, "What are you talking about? This man had a marijuana cigarette in his mouth." This is I mean, anyone with, you know, a 40 IQ knows you can't be shot at close range with an issue 9mm and retain your teeth in your mouth. You have phony teeth, you're going to spit them out.
Right.
But this is our district attorney, who is no secret I disapprove of and criticize harshly, but justifiably, I believe. Something else I want to say. This book, as you may have noted, but you're not bringing it up, has 50 pages of endnotes.
Oh, right. I
50 pages of endnotes. I spent 6 months just typing and retyping those endnotes. You know, I argue with Nickerson's use of case law in turning down motions. Everything in this book is documented. I don't know how many endnotes there are. I mean, it's literally hundreds of endnotes. And look, I was trained as a scholar. I have a PhD in English literature. I used to be an academic. And I have a very good PhD. I mean, it's better than Yale, better than Harvard, goddammit. The Berkeley English department in the early 70s was regarded as the best English PhD, best PhD in English in the country. I got one, okay. I was taught well. While a lot of my buddies were out playing, I was in the stacks of the Berkeley Library. Those skills are brought to bear in those 50 pages of endnotes.
Okay.
Not exactly applied to medieval English literature, but...
All right. I think we have to wrap this up.
Okay,
Thank
wrap
you
it
so
up.
much for stopping by and taking a few minutes out before the talk tonight.
May I say one more thing?
Sure.
So I don't appear just to be a chatterbox. I want this book to make people angry.
Right.
It not only is a good read, I'm being told, but I want this book to stimulate people to ask themselves, what has been going on Cape Cod? I mean, in this sense, it's an overt political act on my part. And I have no shame, no hesitation in saying that.
Yeah, I think once people read through this book like I did, they're going to have a lot of questions.
Well, thank you. That means the book is working.
The book is working.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
and good
much.
luck.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.